Hi, this is your host Bhartia and welcome to our Let's Talk. Today we have with us Doug Dooley, Chief Operating Officer at Data Theorem. Doug, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having us.
It's my pleasure. And today we are going to talk about, of course, CNAP or Cloud Native Application Protection Platform and the whole state of API security. But before we deep dive into this topic, if I'm not wrong, this is the first time I'm talking to someone from Data Theorem, which is also my pleasure today. I would love to know a bit about the company itself. What do you folks do?
Yeah, so we're a Silicon Valley based startup that's been now in business for just over 10 years, fully bootstrapped. I learned about the company because the CEO, founder, Himanshu Dwivedi, he and I have worked together in security for over 25 years. I was a venture capitalist focused on security and cloud infrastructure at Venrock. I tried to invest in the company, but he had already gotten the company profitable by the time I showed up and had a lot of interest. The product was taking off like wildfire in the application security space because he was profitable and he didn't need the investment. He did say he would love my help in helping to scale the company. So we ended up joining forces. I ended up leaving the venture capital world and joined forces with Data Theorem, and it's been just a fun ride. When we first started, it was very much on mobile application security, but we quickly added API security as the second product offering. And customers like foundational customers like Netflix, who was at the time, this is like 10 years ago, you think about it, they were the largest first $1 billion valuated company built on AWS. And a lot of the way we thought about application security and helping IT security protect their apps and protect their data was foundationally built by some of these agile companies who were building their entire software stack on the cloud. And so from that foundation of about 10 years ago, we've been very focused on the different levels of application security, whether it's mobile, whether it's web, whether it's, of course, APIs, which we'd say the network nervous system of all cloud native applications and also the control planes of the cloud. Also, just the foundational cloud services. And then, of course, code. Code sort of is where it starts because the developers have incredible amounts of control and power like they've never had before. When you build an app in the cloud, it's very different than traditional infrastructure. And as a result, those are the 5 product lines we focus on: API, mobile, cloud, web, and code.
We live in a cloud centric, API centric world. And when you are running a business, of course, your customers, and now those customers could be endpoint customers, or it could also be your employees, or you're part of a team. They access it now. They access it through a client. They access through mobile phone. They may access through web, as you rightly mentioned. Things are moving to the edge also. So talk a bit about how do you folks look at security instead of looking at different endpoints. Look at the holistic. Doesn't matter if you're running a business, doesn't matter how people are consuming your services, it should be secure.
Yes, and that's absolutely true. And there's been this like sort of shift in shared responsibility when it comes to security, right? As an example, when a cloud provider experience an outage, right, and you have major banks, major healthcare systems built on AWS, built on Microsoft Azure, GCP. And in China, you see Alibaba still playing a major role. These service level agreements with your clients, it does matter when there's a major outage. It's almost like we're talking about like a power outage. Like if a major part of the United States goes out on a power outage, there's impact. People see the service impact. Now you have to build resiliency into your system, but that impact is sort of a shared model. It's like, hey, look, not only did we go down, so many companies went down because AWS's Northern Virginia data center had a major outage, right? Like everybody kind of knows and starting to get conditioned. Well, security starting to have that shift as well. There was a time when we were building our own data centers primarily on-prem where IT security and IT was sort of, they had to take, the buck stopped with all of them all the time, whether it was an outage, whether it was a breach. It was always sort of internally focused about what they could change. But now with the shared model, there is a shared responsibility. And I think with that shared responsibility model, 2 things have to happen. One is your understanding of architecture of where that line is has to be very clear with your service providers or your SaaS providers, example. The second is the level of monitoring and insight you have to now have. It's very different than before. I would argue that the level of oversight you need to constantly have, not only on the code that your development team is being built, but your software supply chain, oftentimes through open source, SDKs, libraries that you're pulling in, combined with the service provider that the software is now running on top of, living in clouds all around, centers all around the world. This is a much more challenging task going forward. It's a much more hybrid, complex task going forward as an IT security professional trying to deliver that sort of SLA or that high quality security for your customers and your constituents. So, but going forward, like what we see in the cloud native space is the shift in obviously shared responsibility, but also the tooling is changing. Like as example, we talked about if you have a mainframe, the security tooling that you used for Cobalt in the mainframe, heavily for let's call the U.S. federal government, was not the same tooling they used when Unix or Windows sort of came into play with a client server model. Similarly, there has been a shift in the tooling that's happening right now with the cloud. I was one of the first investors of Evident.io. Evident.io started Palo Alto Networks, Prisma's, the 7 acquisitions they made to get into the cloud space. So this is about 9 years ago when I joined the board and invested in Evident, and you could argue it was the first sort of commercial CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management company. And there were some people who were kind of naysaying that security posture management is unimportant. It will eventually settle in to the platforms themselves, meaning Amazon, Microsoft, Google, all the major cloud providers would give that security posture management away for free, and you would never have to spend for it. It would just be something that was built in. Fast forward, there's companies like Wiz, who has had a strong growth tear recently, right? Primarily delivering the same thing that we were delivering 9-10 years ago at Evident. And what that tells us is that even just doing configuration management, ensuring that the configs in the cloud stacks are ensured across multi-cloud, that is still a profitable, growing business and an area that IT security continues to invest in and try to improve. And that's, to us, is still step one when you're trying to secure cloud native applications.
If you look at the whole Kubernetes and CNCF, the whole cloud native movement started, with the whole Kubernetes, and that's when we started talking about a lot of cloud native environment. Cloud native is not a place; it's like a way of doing things, whichever way you want. Can you talk about the importance of API security? Do you feel that organizations are aware of the importance of API security? Because when we look at API security, it's also different from traditional security. In traditional security, there are different teams. Also, the way we were consuming software was also different, right? A company will sell, you'll buy it, you'll run it for 20 years. When the new version will come out, it will take 5 years to actually upgrade everything, to migrate everything to a new version of the software. And of course, security could not be baked in because it was built somewhere else, but was deployed somewhere else. With cloud, deployment happens the same time when the code is being written. So the way, and then everything is driven by APIs. So talk a bit about how the landscape has changed and the importance of the funny thing with security is everybody wants security, but what do we do to ensure that security? That is a big challenge. So talk about the importance of API security and if you are happy with the state of API security.
Yes. So I'll give you 3 points of view on API security. So the first point of view, we'll talk about it from the hacker's perspective, right? Even though my background is not offensive security, I'm more of a defender for my career. But Himanshu, my partner, the CEO of the company, he comes from that offensive background. He's got this great heritage of writing 6 books on hacking and security research. So when you look at it from a hacker's perspective, the current state of the union on APIs is the gift that keeps on giving to attackers, right? There is no easier way to extract data today and monetize data today than breaking into APIs, right? Because remember, every cloud service we just talked about is an API call. Every data plane call in cloud native applications is an API call. So the proliferation of APIs, often insecure, unchecked, ungoverned, no policy, like it is the gift that keeps on giving if you are an attacker looking to extract and steal data and then monetize it on the dark web. There's never been a greater time to be in the hacking business and stealing data. So as a result of that, that's the offensive hacker's perspective. Now, on the defensive IT security perspective, a lot of folks who've been in the industry for a long time, especially they come from an infrastructure perspective, is like, well, look, we will provide the infrastructure guardrails and provide the paved roads for the developers to build on. If they choose not to use these guardrails, to not use the paved roads we provide them, then they're on their own. But that's not true, because once you've been breached, there's no finger pointing. You're like, well, the development team was making millions and millions of dollars for us, but they got us breached. Now we've lost billions in market cap. It's their fault that they went off the paved road. Like that finger pointing thing doesn't work, because now we've seen C-level executives are getting fired, and in some situations dealing with federal lawsuits and jail time when things go wrong on a data breach, right? So we know that the stakes are much higher now, so that on the defender side, API security has become a major initiative in the cloud security program, because they know when you go from on-prem to cloud, your API attack surface explodes, and the number of attackers coming after you explodes as well as a result of that API footprint. So I think they understand that. Like, I think there was a statistic recently that came out from last year to this, from 2023 to 2024, the number of API attacks went up 3,000%. So I think it's just going to keep accelerating because the number of major data infrastructure projects moving to the cloud, it's just more cost effective. It's easier to build now in the cloud, manage in the cloud, cut costs in the cloud. It's easier. So as a result, you're seeing that agile movement happen. And as a result, the security posture is going to have to change and the tooling is going to have to change. The final perspective I would say is sort of the boardroom, right? In the boardroom situation, a lot of boards who have very proprietary useful data, they're starting to get savvy about who is going in this generation of AI, machine learning, or Gen AI, who's going to monetize this unique data the best. Will it be our company? We're a bank. We've been around for 100 years. We have all of this interesting data and insight, yet we don't know how to quite capitalize on it. Is Google and Microsoft and OpenAI, are these the companies going to take advantage of all this proprietary data because we're going to voluntarily share it and they're going to learn all the new business models and all the new services that should be created? Are we not going to benefit from our own proprietary data? So I think there's this concept that people know that data is gold, right? Hence the company's data theorem, right? Like, we're really the partner to try to help them protect their data. So that protectionist attitude that the board is starting to have about not overly sharing proprietary data is actually changing the way they think about API security, because most of the time your data is being siphoned off into the cloud for an application or a service through an API, right? So all of this has now become, it's going from a pure cost center or a regulatory requirement or data breach prevention to, it's like, look, this is our lifeline for the future. This data is so important to us. How do we make sure it's ours, it's kept secure, and it's not overly shared to the cloud unnecessarily where we won't get the benefit? Instead, just the cloud providers and the AI platforms are the ones who are getting all the benefit. So those are three perspectives of why, like, from a business perspective, API is not this buried thing in IT anymore. It is elevated beyond developers, beyond IT security, beyond even the hackers, to the board level.
And I do want to bring that point, what Satya Nadella said, that's, SaaS, software as service, is that because of AI, of course, we will see, all these kind of, whenever we see these statements, we have to take it with a grain of salt. But let's hope. Let's just assume that, okay, this is what the reality is, because of AI. Once again, we'll see how AI actually, or Gen AI actually works out. A lot of things are going on in this space. What does it mean for security?
Yeah, I think there was a while there, let's say 10 years ago, especially when I was more active in the venture capital investment space. I would look at 300 security companies a year. I'd probably get excited 12 times a year, and I'd offer a term sheet, 3 times a year, and I'd do probably one investment a year. That was my track record as a VC investor. And so, looking at all the security companies 10 years ago, it was sort of like pixie dust. It was like, I have this security offering, and then they would sprinkle pixie dust, like marketing dust, on their offering saying that we have AI and machine learning. But then when you'd actually dig a little deeper and be like, what practical, valuable use cases are you solving better with this sort of AI model? And the two things that I learned was, one, do you have a large enough data set, an interesting enough data set to process through the AI ML model? And then second, do you have a finite outcome? If you don't have these two ingredients, lots of data and a finite, non-exceptional outcome, generally AI and ML is going to cause more problems than good, right? So when you think about security, where are the situations where you have massive amounts of data, right? Like a signal to noise ratio problem, where you can process with things like, AI and ML. And then when can you get a finite outcome, right? Is this an attack, or is this a legitimate transaction? Is this deep denial of service, or is this just a very popular thing that I'm now selling during a seasonal time of the year? Like, these are very difficult things to know for sure. But that's an example. So I think when it comes to threat detection, there's been a lot of promise and theory about AI and ML providing major improvement. But so far, I think it's been more of an iterative improvement, meaning like systems that don't use any AI and ML versus systems that use AI and ML. You're seeing an iterative improvement, but no company have I heard of say, without AI and ML, our detection for threat would be zero. Like, nobody has said that. Basically saying we already have threat detection modeling and we enhance the quality using AI and ML. And we, at least at Data Theorem, on our platform side, there are like 4 or 5 different systems that we've already built in place that we've enhanced with AI and ML to usually reduce cost, improve accuracy, but never as a wholesale replacement. We haven't found anything yet that's been a wholesale replacement. Here's another example: secure code. When we find in our customer stacks, whether it's through their repositories or converting binary code into byte code, because we can do that with our engine, whenever we find live code where we can trace vulnerability and exploit in the code, we can provide them secure code samples. Now with AI and ML, we can improve the quality and the diversity of code samples across lots of different languages and lots of different versions of languages. So that helps, but it's not a full replacement of also enhancing that code and making sure a human is curating that code to ensure like we're not giving them junk. Because that'd be the worst thing, right? They have insecure code. We give them a no look pass of AI ML generated code to fix it, and no curation has occurred, and we provide even a worse situation like non-functional code. So these are examples where I think the AI and ML continues to be like a calculator helping a math student be better at math versus it completely replaces the math student. We haven't gotten to that point yet in security that we've seen.
And security is also, I always believe, is not a destination, it's a journey, it's a process. It's not a product. And bad guys have to be right only once, good guys have to be right 101% time. But when we look at enterprise systems, what are the gaps that you see are still there, especially when we are talking about cloud and cloud native?
I think one of the major gaps is cultural, to be honest, right now. So the cultural gap is the motivations, the incentive structure. So when you think of IT security in particular, they're highly motivated to avoid something like a data breach, for good reason, by the way, right? If you have a major headline data breach and you have a chief information security officer at the board level, they're the first sort of neck in the chopping block, right? Like, who's to blame if this bank, this healthcare system, this government, this tech company has a major data breach? It's the chief information security officer that typically has to take the bulk of the heat in the beginning, right? And then when you look at the folks building products, the business lines, like especially during COVID, it was like we have these digital initiatives to get closer to our customer, to engage our customers in different ways than we used to. Maybe we can't get a physical touch on that customer. Can we engage them in a more interesting, more vibrant way through the mobile application, through that web application, whatever that digital interface is going to be with that human? Can we bring them a better experience? And so you saw tremendous creativity and agility and experimentation going on in the software that's being shipped to customers. But never in there was security at the top 3 or top 5 things to do when building these new experiences for customers, particularly when COVID happened and everything had to go digital. So there's this cultural gap of like, if I'm an IT security professional, I'm thinking don't have a data breach, not on my watch. When you're a developer, DevOps engineer, not DevSecOps, but DevOps engineer, you're thinking, how do I ship as many features as we can? How can we iterate as fast as we can? How can we maintain high uptime? Because downtime represents less revenue, less engagement. So uptime, feature velocity, that's DevOps. Data breach, security risk, and compliance, that's IT security. There's a cultural divide because the incentive structures aren't aligned. So now people are talking about DevSecOps teams, right? These agile development teams where the security person has a seat at the table. So what we notice, the thing that's most successful is not when you try to beat down the DevOps engineers and then turn them into security professionals. Not to say, hey, you need to come to our tribe and think like a security professional and be risk adverse of every single thing, every piece of code that you write. That almost never works. Like forcing them through 8 weeks of security training for secure code training. Like this is like relationship damaging between teams, right? The other way works much better. Make a security person think like a developer. Put the gun to their head and said, every week you have to deliver features, features, features. The train always moves. There's no rollback. It's only roll forward. So like example, Netflix does 300 production changes per day on their software stack to customers. Like take a step back and think about that. 300, whether they're small or medium or large feature changes per day to their customers. So the number of banks or tech companies that can operate at that speed of agile, it's pretty rare. So when you look at their security teams on how they all are fluent in coding. So when you become fluent in coding as a security professional, your level of empathy goes way up with what the challenge of running a digital business is. And when you have a security professional that can work like that, then provide the safety rails, then provide the guardrails, then provide the audit compliance protection. You engineer it differently because you can walk in their shoes of what it takes to ship features with uptime every week. So that's when we see the most successful coming together of that gap is the gap starts to close when IT security stops thinking just paved road my way or the highway and starts thinking I have to think like a developer, or at least I have a set of people in my organization that think like developers. Then that cultural bridge closes. And I think that's one of the top gaps most organizations are still facing.
Doug, thank you so much for joining me today, and of course talk about the company and the whole security, cloud security, API security landscape. Thanks for great insights, and I would love to have you folks back on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much.